if you go over. So with that, I would like to welcome JoeTartaro, the president of the foundation and the editor of the Gun Mag. Thank you.
See if I can handle this mic right. I'd like to welcome you all and join Julie in welcoming you to the 30th Annual Gun Rights Policy Conference. It's particularly exciting to Alan and I to see this crowd here.
It's in the room.
You are 5 or 6 times, or maybe even 7 times as many people as were at the very first conference, which was held in Bellevue, Washington in 1986. The number of you who I'd like to see a show of hands, how many of you have been to a previous gun rights policy conference? Great, great. All you veterans are welcome. It's exciting to see you here, as well as all the newcomers. When we started these conferences in '86, we had so few people, but it was a good start. It was a significant start because for the first time in anyone's memory, all of the national pro-gun groups and about 20 state groups met in Bellevue, Washington in a wide-ranging national discussion of gun issues and to discuss strategies for the future. Some of those issues have been dealt with during the past 30 years. Some of them are still with us. And this agenda will deal with those, mostly with a lot of new and hopefully brighter speakers than we've had. There were several firearms industry sponsors of the first GRPC, and there have been many others ever since. They think our meeting here is important. Back in '86, the biggest pro-gun achievement was passage of the Firearms Owner Protection Act, which had been bottled up in Congress for 6 years. It wasn't perfect, and it still doesn't always work in states like New York and New Jersey. It also came with a heavy price. The anti-gunners slipped in a last-minute amendment banning the sale or transfer of newly manufactured machine guns, a ban that affected law-abiding gun owners and drove lots of small companies out of business. Many in the NFA community felt that not enough had been done to prevent this last-minute voice vote attack. And it was no surprise that Linda Farmer arose and first offered the NATO Doctrine Unity Resolution for gun owners. Quote, to treat an attack on one gun as an attack on all guns, an attack on one gun owner or group of gun owners as an attack on all gun owners. That resolution passed at the very first conference, and it has been reconfirmed by every conference since. Now, everything wasn't doom and gloom in those days. At the first conference, noted attorney and scholar Don B. Cates outlined a program for the first time of legal action to preserve the Second Amendment through the courts. It took time, but we've certainly made progress in the courts since then. Besides the Heller and McDonald decisions with which you are also familiar, there have been many more at the federal circuit court level, at the federal appellate court level, and even in state courts. Each victory is a step in the right direction, and the foundation likes to go by the slogan, winning firearms freedom, one lawsuit at a time. There were a lot of serious issues at the first conference, and some of them are still a problem. Back in the mid-1980s, the U.S. Public Health Service came out with a scheme to have Congress impose, quote, a complete and universal ban on the sale, manufacture, importation, and possession of all handguns, except for police and the military. That segment of the health community has toned down their rhetoric a bit since 1986, but they haven't given up. Part of the reason they've toned down the rhetoric is that now we have a lot of pro-gun members of the medical community speaking out and publishing, and you'll hear from them during this conference. Other issues that the anti-gunners were pushing back in 1986 included armor-piercing ammunition, a ban on so-called plastic guns, and civil liability for gun manufacturers and retailers. The gun grabbers' attempt to sue the firearms industry back in the 1980s and 90s, a topic that covered the very first GRPC by representatives of the industry, was finally bottled up after a dozen years due to the unified effort to pass the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Firearms Act. And so far, state and federal courts have been upholding that law despite persistent challenges by the Brady campaign and their friends, and of course, Michael Bloomberg. That's a problem that is still being pursued through the courts. And now there's a push for open carry and an expansion of permitless carry. Back when the first GRPC was held, there was only one state that allowed people to carry concealed or otherwise without a license. That's why at one time people referred to such a system as Vermont-style carry. That's because Vermont never did require a license for law-abiding citizens, even though there are some people in Vermont who keep trying to impose their licensing system. On the back road to this conference is 4 more states joined Vermont with permitless carry: Alaska in 2003, Arizona in 2010. Applause here. Wyoming in 2011, Arkansas in 2013. Wyoming's law is a little limited to residents only, and parts of Montana are also permit-free for residents. Until a viable federal reciprocity system is passed, an item still on our bucket list, most permitless states will issue licenses so that residents can carry in other states and take advantage of state-by-state reciprocity agreements. But meanwhile, civil rights activists are pushing for permitless carry in several other states, and not always with immediate success, but gaining ground. After the 2014 elections, more firearms-friendly lawmakers took control of nearly a dozen state legislatures, allowing permitless carry, concealed carry efforts to resurge in places like Colorado, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Maine, New Hampshire, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, and West Virginia. So far, Kansas and Maine are the only efforts that were true success stories. Idaho is still hung up on some wording and probably deal with it in the next legislative session. New Hampshire and West Virginia bills were passed, but then vetoed. Permitless carry even passed in the Colorado Senate, but ran aground in the House. And it's still alive, slightly, in Ohio. My message today, in viewing the road we've been traveling, is that bad things seem some days, weeks, and months that we're coming through a long process since 1986. Change takes time, but the road ahead is clear. Together, networked and unified, which was the main purpose of the first and later GRPCs, we will overcome hostile presidents and banks full of billionaire anti-gunners like Bloomberg, Gates, and their ilk. Let's do it all together. Thanks.